If I were to sum up my feelings about this drama, the drama being History 3 Trapped, don't get this confused with the previous History 3 that I reviewed. It's not the same. It's not the same drama. But if I were to sum up my feelings, I'd say this is one of my top favorite dramas that I've seen on Viki. And there's a channel that's also uploading some dramas on YouTube, and I watched it again on YouTube. If I were to sum up my feelings, I'd say this, like I said, is one of my favorite and top BL dramas ever. And I'll give you a slight rundown on the plot of the drama. So we have two main couples, right? Xiaofei and Tangyi. Okay. Then we have Jack and Zhao. So those are our two main characters, right? Obviously there's other roles, and I'll probably get to those as I give you a breakdown of the plot. So Xiaofei is a police officer, and Tangyi is a mobster, essentially. He's in the mob. Jack happens to work under Tangyi, and Xiao is in the police force with Xiaofei. So the whole idea with Xiaofei and Tangyi is that Xiaofei has been essentially, I don't want to say hunting, but I guess you could say hunting Tangyi to try to solve this murder case, right? And he believes that he is either the one that committed the murder or has something to do with the murder. That he's dedicated a lot of his time throughout the drama trying to crack the case, essentially, right? I really enjoy the dynamic between Tangyi and Xiaofei, because Xiaofei is kind of this goofy, kind of somewhat playful, dorky kind of character, and Tangyi is this reserved business type guy, and their dynamic is really nice, and I appreciate it. Throughout the drama, Xiaofei is essentially trying to find more information about the murder case that happened several years ago, and his police chief tells him, you're gonna have to give up on this dream of solving this, because there's nothing to go off of. And that's essentially the dynamic, right, throughout the entire film. And the more time Xiaofei spends with Tangyi, the more he, tries to hunt him down, the more he tries to, get more information and spend time with him. He finds himself getting kind of, I don't want to say obsessed, but kind of infatuated and kind of enamored, I guess you could say. He finds himself getting more and more in tune with wanting to know more about Tangyi as Tangyi, right? And there's like several moments where, you know, Xiaofei will be trying to basically being Tang Yi's bodyguard, you know, trying to look after him. And there's a point where Xiaofei comes across, because this is like a time when he's still trying to figure out if Tang Yi has something to do with the murder case, right? There's like this sting operation where, you know, they're going undercover at like this bar or something, or this club, and like he's dancing with one of his co-workers, and he looks over and he sees Tang Yi, you know, dancing up on and like holding this other character, this other guy, and like he just finds himself like constantly staring at him during that. And one of Xiaofei's co-workers tells him, oh yeah, it turns out that he likes, you know, boys and girls and that kind of thing. He was like, okay. And Tang Yi sees him like staring at him and his little, you know, boy toy, and like he like kind of does things to like make Xiaofei, I guess, jealous in a way, or enact a reaction out of him. So, you know, he does that, and then Xiaofei tries to go and pull them apart, but his coworker, you know, tells him, no, we're gonna blow our cover, don't do that, right? Too bad that the cover already ends up getting blown, because some mess ends up happening. So, you know, after that, right, Xiaofei is like pissed off and like storming around like the house, because remember I mentioned that he was becoming Tang Yi's bodyguard, so he had to like move in and like be there with him, so he can, you know, solve the case. And he's like storming around the house and stuff. And actually before that, right, this scene is hilarious to me. So he was getting out of the car, right, and Tang Yi is like looking kind of smug. He's like, oh, like, you know, why are you upset or something like that, right? And he was like, oh, you really, and Xiaofei is like, oh, you really just gonna let like someone, you know, touch all of you at like a club or whatever? And he was like, he said something along the lines of like, oh, you want to touch? And like he like takes off his jacket. I'm just like, y'all are, this is the mess. So there's just like so many moments of that, of Xiaofei kind of not noticing that he's kind of falling for Tang Yi, but like he's falling for him, and it seems as if Tang Yi is also falling, because there's another time when they're actually sitting down at dinner, Xiaofei would like ask like a question or something, and Tang Yi would give like this really dull, non-interested answer as he's like staring bullets into his face. Anyway, so yeah, so I'm gonna like fast forward a lot actually. So okay, so Xiaofei's emotions are kind of in shambles because of the feelings that he has for Tang Yi, right? So like, for example, Xiaofei and Tangyi's sister, Hangye, they they get into like a little argument because she's like, oh, your people don't belong here, meaning police don't belong in like a mob like household or whatever. And like she basically like starts saying stuff like to try to egg him on, and he ends up like grabbing her shoulder. Tangyi comes out of the fucking cut and grabs him and pushes him off him and tells him don't touch my sister or whatever. And Xiaofei is like, oh, did you not even hear what she said? She was like, he was like, oh, I don't care, just don't touch my sister, right? So that's the part when he storms off and like starts like grumbling to himself as he's like walking around the mansion. He's like grumbling about how like, oh, Tangyi, you're so, how could you not believe me and you believe your sister, that kind of thing. Right. So after some time of Tangyi and Xiaofei growing a liking for each other, Xiaofei is like working at the precinct, and he's like working overnight, and he finds this discovery that's linked to Tangyi, right? Like he finds this birth certificate that happens to be the same birth day and year as Tangyi, and he gets confused. He's like, okay, what is going on here, right? So he goes on like a whole day search of trying to find out and link everything to do with this, right? And as this is going on, Tangyi is trying to call him and like tell him, hey, what's going on, why aren't you answering my phone calls, right? They go to voicemail every single time, and Xiaofei is, like I said, trying to find out the information, and by the time he like actually comes home, Tangyi is about to I think he was going to call him again, but he walks through the door. Xiaofei walks through the door. Xiaofei is like, oh, you called me this many times and you messaged me this many times. She was like, you must have been really worried about me. And Tangyi is like, oh, whatever, right? And Tangyi, asks him, why were you, gone for so long, right? And Xiaofei is like, okay, you have to promise that you won't be, upset at me. Promise that you won't be mad. And he was like, why are you suddenly being hesitant with wanting to tell me stuff? Just tell me what's going on, right? Basically telling him that he doesn't think, Xiaofei basically tells Tangyi he doesn't think who Tangyi thinks killed his foster dad is who he thinks it is, essentially. And this kind of like ticks Tangyi off, and he's like, no, I know exactly who did this. Why are you investigating my past? She's like, Xiaofei's like, it kind of just happened. It kind of just like happened. It just, he's basically saying he didn't mean to investigate his past, but it just kind of ended up happening. Clearly, by the way, speaking of them, they're already like in some sort of relationship at this point in time, right? Tangyi's sister isn't really fond of this, not because they're limperous, but because she doesn't like the fact of mob guys being in tune with the police, right? So Slightly going back before I finish the big drama ending, Tangi's sister basically says that she wants to, go shopping, and, Xiaofei is like, hey, I'll go with you or whatever, right? I'll take you there, right? And they get there, they're buying stuff and whatever, right? And then as they're walking towards the car, right, somebody starts busting caps, right? He tells her to duck down, he grabs her, and he's like, we have to hurry and get to the car, right? There's a gunshot, and the gunshot ends up, it seemed as though the gunshot hit his sister, because the way they framed the shot where he like fell on top of her, and it looked like she got shot, but it turns out that Xiaofei got shot. And right, so Tangi and his people, they go to the hospital, and so does Xiaofei and his people, like the rest of the co-workers at the precinct. They go check on Xiaofei. Tangi's people and Tangi himself didn't stay that long at the actual hospital, because there was a bit of drama between Tangi and the captain of the precinct, because he's like, oh, if anything ever happens again to Xiaofei, it's going to be problems, right? So that's the first time Xiaofei gets hurt. The second time is because I believe this was the second or last time, actually before that, right? There's a lot to this story, I'm sorry. So remember how I mentioned that Tangi is a mob boss, right? He's in the mafia. There's one of his, I guess you could say, right-hand man, who happens to like Tangi, right? But he's aware that Xiaofei and Tangi are a thing, but he doesn't like the fact that Tangi and Xiaofei are a thing. So what he ends up doing is, right, and as this is going on, Xiaofei is literally getting ambushed, right? So they're in the car together, right? His name is Jada, the guy I'm talking about. He's driving the car, and Tangi is in the the back seat. I was going to say the rear seat, the back seat. Tangi takes a drink of like this water, right? And like he kind of looks a little strange after a few seconds, and he looks into the rearview mirror, like, staring at Jada. He like falls asleep, right? And we're led to believe that he was drugged, right? So when they get to the house, Jada, he gets out of the car, tries to act like he's trying to wake him up, right? And he apologizes, then he proceeds to do that. And Tangi's trying to fight him off or whatever. He ends up getting the upper hand after a lot of struggling. A very hard scene to watch. I wouldn't suggest watching that scene if things like that trigger you, like assault. Don't watch that scene. So he gets the upper hand. He ends up wrapping a seatbelt around Jada's neck to choke him, and he ends up calling Jack. Remember I mentioned Jack? He ends up calling him, and yeah. So back in the room, right? Tangi is about to beat this ass when Xiaofei walks in. He's like, no, please just let me, take care of this. Just let me take him in. So at this point, the dynamic is that Xiaofei wants to do things the right way by, taking criminals to jail, making them pay for their crimes, right? What Tangi wants to do is revenge. He wants to get revenge on anyone and everyone who's caused him to be or go through something, or caused him pain, or caused people in his life pain. He wants, to do revenge, and that's kind of the whole ideal with him being, the top guy in his current mob family, right? So back to the event where Tangi and Xiaofei were like talking to each other, and Xiaofei was like, hey, please don't be mad at me, I was just investigating the case, right, the murder case. So they're going back and forth saying, hey, I don't basically Tangi says, don't investigate, my past, right? Anyway, so fast forwarding, because this video is going to be really fucking long. So Tangi ends up getting a call that his sister Hongye got kidnapped, right? And like her life may or may not be in danger. So him and Xiaofei, they drive to this warehouse, right, where he sees Wenhao, who he believed to have been the man who shot his stepfather. So they have like this stare down, and Tangi sees his sister, tied up and like gagged, right? And he's about to, start busting on Wenhao, but they end up, threatening to kill his sister, right? So right before things are about to get bad, right, Xiaofei gets in between Tangi and all the other people and says, I have to, please just listen to me, basically telling him that Wenhao, this is like the part that gets me, this entire sequence of events. So Xiaofei tells Tangi that Wenhao is his father, and that's where that event ends. And then it goes to them outside. It goes to Wenhao, Tangi, and Xiaofei outside talking, and Xiaofei is like, I'm being truthful. This is what happened, right? He says, this is the truth, and I'm sorry, but this is what the truth is, right? And then Tangi is like, so what? Do you think this is gonna change anything? He killed my stepdad. My caretaker, he murdered him in cold blood. And Xiaofei is like, you don't know that, but he was like, do you really want to kill him? He's your dad. And he was like, Tangi tells him that you're not my father. I can't remember the name of his father. I mean, it's kind of important to the story, but I'm blanking right now. I'm sorry. So when how he like turns around, basically trying to confirm that he's Xiaofei's father, right? When Tangi tells him, "Oh, you're not my dad or whatever," he ends up slapping him. He slaps him in the face, and he's like, "You know, this is how it is, And Tangi ends up storming away because he's like, "No, I'm not with that, no." So he storms away, he gets in the car and drives. And when him and Tangi, when him and Xiaofei get home, when Xiaofei gets home, he's like looking around trying to find Tangi, right? And me explaining the scene doesn't really do justice with how emotionally effective it was. So Tangi is like looking for, oh my god, Xiaofei is looking for Tangi, right, throughout the house, and then he sees him, just like sitting in the bathroom, and before he can like grab him, Tangi like gets up and he runs out, and like there's like this really intense emotional scene where Tangi is like bawling, crying, right, as Xiaofei is like, "Tangi, please just listen to me, it's okay," he's like trying to grab him and hold him, but Tangi is trying to like get away and like cry or whatever, but it's just I can't explain it properly, and me explaining it is not doing the scene justice. Go watch it, please. It's a very intense and very well acted scene. I'm just gonna say that. So he settles down and he tells Xiaofei, "Just don't pay attention to me, don't pay attention to me." He's like, basically Tangi is trying to, my god, Xiaofei is trying to console Tangi, right? He's trying to tell him, it's okay, I know this is hard for you to come to terms with, that the guy that you believe murdered your what's the word, your caregiver, right, the one you thought did that, you still may believe that he did that, but he ends up being your dad. That's a lot, right? So he tells Tangi that he's going to find out who actually murdered his father, right? So, well, I keep saying father, but his caregiver, right? So it turns out, I'm just going to say who it was. There's this coworker, right? His name, I'm not good with Taiwanese names and like Chinese names. I'm not good at pronouncing it, so I apologize if I'm pronouncing these improperly, wrongly. I'm sorry. Or Aji. Wow, I'm just gonna say Aji, okay? Because it's Azhi. Obviously, that's the romanization, but Anyway, so he worked at the police firm with Xiaofei and everyone else, right? And it turns out he was the one who murdered Tangi's caregiver. And the way that like the scene played out, right, we didn't find this out until we get to see the actual scene at its full length, right? So the way it ends up happening, right, Tangi and his caregiver, I'm so sorry I forgot his name, they're, talking, and then he's like, okay, I have to go, inside, and his caregiver, walks up the stairs, right? And then this is like the first time we see the scene, and Tangi is like sitting, on the stairs, right? Or like standing next to the stairs or whatever, and he hears a gunshot, and he like bolts up the stairs, right? And then he sees his caregiver on the ground dead, and then he sees this guy turn and look at him and then blast on him, right? But again, this isn't the full scene. And then the next time we see the scene, we see it from Wenhao's perspective, right? So clearly the guy who turned around and shot was Wenhao, right? We see it from his perspective, where his girlfriend slash wife, I'm gonna say girlfriend, was meeting up with Tangi's caregiver, right? I feel so bad for not remembering his name, I'm sorry. He ends up meeting up with him, right? Well, she ends up meeting up with him, his girlfriend, Wenhao's girlfriend. And he was like, I didn't think he was going to be meeting up with her, right? And he believed that she was cheating, right? So he like runs over, and he was like, oh my gosh, what happened, right? He's trying to wake them up, and then he stands up, and again we see Tangi get shot, right, as Wenhao is about to pull out the gun. Again, this still isn't the full scene, so we see the scene again from his perspective, but then we see Aja turn, right, and bust a cap in Tangi. So, for those of you who are confused, the scene starts off. I'm just gonna say what this is what happened, right? The scene starts off. Tangi's caregiver walks up the stairs. He meets up with Wenhao's girlfriend, right? Turns or whatever and sees Aja. Aja shoots the girlfriend and the caregiver, and when Tangi hears those gunshots, he runs up the stairs, sees Wenhao, but when he turns to look at his caregiver and his the caregiver's girlfriend, Wenhao's girlfriend, he gets bust a cap in by Aja. That probably still sounds confusing, but it's a really in-depth filled scene. We're not near the end, by the way. We're almost 40 minutes in, but I'm nowhere near done talking about this. So we get a bit of backstory between Wenhao, the caregiver, and his girlfriend. So it turns out she was pregnant, right? And she told Wenhao that she had an abortion, and he was like in jail at the time, and like she's like talking to him through like like those little phones that they talk through in the jail. And she tells him, okay, you told me that you would never, you would stop doing this, you would stop doing this whole mob thing, right? So she ended up telling him that she got an abortion, right? And he's like, oh my gosh, why would you do that? And it was really sad because she says, oh, she said that I'm pregnant, right? And he was like, oh my gosh, we're pregnant, oh my god. He gets really excited, right? And then she was like, I had an abortion. And he's just like, what the fuck, why would you do that, right? He was like, you didn't even tell me this, but now you're telling me that you're pregnant and you say that you got an abortion. What? So it turns out that it was a lie, and y'all probably figured this out by now, but the baby that she said was aborted was Tangi, and he thought that the baby was dead because she told him she had an abortion, right? So he had no rhyme or reason to go search for if the baby was alive or dead, right? So that's sad, right? And obviously this like breaks Tangi's heart again. And Shafe is like, you have to promise me that you'll let me handle this, the way it needs to be handled, right? Just let me handle it the right way, right? And then finally, Tangi is like, okay, I will, right? So this next scene is very sad. So Tangi, he goes to his mother's grave. He's just he sets some flowers down. Well, he doesn't set flowers down, but he looks at the thing, and you know how this shit works. And in the corner we see Wenhao walk up, and he walks to the grave, he places down some flowers, and he goes next to Tangi, and he looks over at him, and he's like, she never let me know that you existed, right? She never told me that the baby was actually alive, right? Before she passed. Wenhao pulls out a cigarette, right? Really fancy looking cigarette too. It was black with like a gold rim around. I was like, y'all need to stop with that rich shit. So he pulls out the cigarette, and he's like looking for his lighter or something to light it with. Can't find it. So Tangi pulls out the lighter that his caregiver gave him, right? And he gives it to Wenhao, and Wenhao kind of smiles and like holds it, and he lights a cigarette, right? Essentially he shares like some words with Tangi. I think he says something like sorry or something. I can't exactly remember what was said, but it ends up with them hugging, and Wenhao starts crying, and Tangi starts crying, right? And when Tangi walks away, he starts walking away, right, after the hug. And he keeps walking, and like I said, this scene is very sad and very effective, and there's this really looming background music that's like happening throughout the entire scene. And we get like a shot from behind, I believe, where he's like walking, where Tangi's walking, right? And trigger warning, he walks towards these stairs. He walks up the stairs slowly, and then once he gets to a certain step, he hears a gunshot. And when I say this scene is just so well done, like, oh my god, because the music is like blaring, right? And it's like raining, not like pouring rain, but it's raining, really gloomy outside. It's a cemetery. So he like I said, he walks up the stairs, and then he stops when he hears a gunshot, and the music abruptly stops, and then it's silent for a few seconds, and then you just hear Tangi start bawling, crying. It was... Please watch this drama. Please. It's so good. So clearly what happened, right? Wenhao took his life, clearly. So after that, right, Tangi meets up with Xiaofei, right? And this scene was pretty sad too, but like it becomes wholesome near the end, right? So it ends up being Tangi's birthday, right? He is like opening his gifts by himself, and like he starts crying, but then Xiaofei walks in, right? And he walks in with the cake, and he's like singing happy birthday to him, and he like puts the cake down, and it was really wholesome, because as soon as he saw Xiaofei walking with the cake, he starts like bawling, right? Because at this point in time, Tangi doesn't have anyone other than like his sister, but like when it comes to like, you know, an adult figure in his life, he doesn't really have that. And like he's like really sad because he usually doesn't celebrate his, you know, birthday, because usually he would have celebrated it with his caregiver, and every year when his caregiver was alive, he did do that. So you know, there's this really like cute scene where like Xiaofei, he like puts on this like birthday hat on Tangi, and you know, just cute shit, right? And then there's more cute shit, and like, you know, they kiss, etc., right? Anyways, so near the end of the movie, right, we're almost there. There's a scene where Tangi and Xiaofei are like, you know, in the room together, and they're like sitting there, right? And Xiaofei tells him essentially he has to turn himself in. With him being, you know, a mob boss, assault, shooting an officer, because I forgot to mention that. When they ended up finding out that Aja was the actual killer, Tangi was just gonna fucking like sacrifice his ass, and like, you know, with a gun. And before he actually ended up getting to shoot Aja, he ends up shooting Tangi in the stomach, right? So Xiaofei is like, you have to, you know, turn yourself in. And he's like, yeah, you know, I know. And, you know, the next morning they show up to the courtroom, and he turned himself in. And that's essentially the show. I didn't really mention much about Jack and Bian, because I liked their dynamic. I do. I think it was really cute, but it wasn't as in depth as Xiaofei and Tangi. So yeah, this is what like I said, one of my favorite BL dramas. It's just such a beautiful story, tragic, really sad. If you don't do well with like really sad shows or stories, maybe don't watch this, because it's really sad. Yeah, anyway, I really loved the dynamic of Xiaofei and Tangi. I'm a sucker for enemies to lovers stories, especially ones that are done as well as this, where it's not like it's not just like given to you for the sake of being given to you. It's, you know, earned, because there was a long time where Tangi just didn't want anything to do with Xiaofei at all. Like there were times where he was just so, you know, hostile to them, because it was a mob boss versus a police officer. But such such a lovely story. If I'm being honest, there's not really anything I didn't like about the show. I'm trying to think, but there's honestly nothing. in my eyes, it's pretty much perfection. So I'm going to give this a very high 9.5 out of 10. It's that good. You can watch it for free on YouTube and also on Viki. Great. This is great. Amazing acting. Hilarious in a lot of parts. I like dramas that can be serious and also like goofy in some parts. I appreciate that. Anyway, and that was my long ass review of History 3 Trapped. I am going to have a hard time editing this and uploading it. So I'm filming this on the 29th of October. This is probably not going to be uploaded until November. I'm being honest with y'all. I'm being very honest with y'all. I have a slow ass bandwidth, so there's that. Anyway, I will see you in my next review. Hopefully the next one isn't like a million hours long. Goodbye.